and welcome to the Nurse Rosa's Insights podcast. I'm your host, Nurse Rosa Hart, and today we are live at VIVE, which is a health innovation conference. And my guest today is Christian Boucher. He is a health tech innovator. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Christian.
Thank you for having me today. So I've been in healthcare IT now for close to 25 years, probably closer to 30 when I think about it. Really focused originally on the provider side. So I worked for a health system back in New England for about 12 years, owning various teams, architecture, design, security. But, my focus was always been that interconnect between technology and providers. How can we deliver better experiences? Their job isn't to work with technology. Their job is to treat patients, and anything that we could do to simplify their interactions with technology and lower those barriers between them and the patients, which oftentimes were a challenge, especially when you start getting into some of the complex workflows.
Well, you sound like you understand that pretty well. How did you get into healthcare if your background is not in healthcare?
Well, that's an interesting story. So my wife is a hospice nurse, and she was.
Wow.
But you can understand in her role, we got very close to a lot of families throughout the years as that process, and seeing the work that she did and the impact that she had in those situations, and dealing with grieving parents and all that stuff. It was very impactful to me, and I saw the value that I could bring, looking at the technology that they had at that time, trying to do those very difficult treatments, and working with families at the same time, struggling with technology to do the things that were required by.
What was your role that let you see what she was doing?
Within the hospice side, she was involved even outside of work. So she
on call a lot?
On call,
like
and
that.
she would have her laptop that she worked on, but even beyond that, the hospice program that she was in was very inclusive. So, we were invited to family parties. So we were very close and became family members. It's a funny story, but one of the patients' wives was an artist. And after he had passed and all the, everything had settled down, she painted a picture of our house for us, and she gave it to her as a gift for Christmas. It was a big, so you realize the interconnection and how much impact that she can have, not just in her daily job, but in the lives, of all the patients that she treated. So it really drove me to be like, I don't need this leadership role anymore. I want to get back into the architecture and hopefully sit in a spot where I can work at elbow's length with doctors and nurses and see if I can help find ways to improve the way they interact with technology.
Did you see ways that the technology was inhibiting their ability to focus on the patient interaction side of things?
Yes, and it was different between, a nurse, a hospice nurse is different than one that comes off of a med-surg floor. Mm-hmm. That's different than a pediatrics floor. Those workflows all need to be different. And not to say that they weren't different workflows, but the technology that they were implementing, I don't want to say it was a one-size-fit-all, but there wasn't enough flexibility in how they could utilize it.
And adapt it to the particular specialty.
Exactly. So one of my main roles, especially as we were originally a hospital system and we grew into a health system, part of that was physician acquisition practices, merging in, standing up new modalities, whether it was cardiology, oncology. So part of that role was, interviewing doctors as we were recruiting them in to be part of this program, understanding their technology needs, how they worked before, how we could bridge it from what the systems they had previously to what we were going to offer in our health system. So it gave me a lot of insight into how they wanted to work. And oftentimes it was also about education, because again, their specialty is their specialty, and they don't know all the things that they have the capability to do moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. They know workarounds maybe for what they've been working with.
Yes, and I think that was really my most challenging, but also most rewarding aspect of it, being able to go in and say, these are the things that we talked about, this is how we're going to implement them, and watch real time how they changed. And sometimes it's something as simple as a doctor can see 2 more patients per day because they don't have to be caught up with, fumbling with technology and all that stuff. The other part is when we think about the burnout rate for clinicians and physicians. I witnessed it with my wife working till 9, 10 o'clock at night, finishing up documentation that she didn't have a chance to because of her schedule, because she was in the field. So how can we help, solve that problem? And it's part of it is process, some of it's people, and some of it's technology. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of that billion-dollar question is really, we need to find a way that we can bring the technologists and the clinicians together a little bit better essentially bringing them, if this purposely did this, brought my engineers into the units that we were working on so they could see the flow, because we think a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
Clinicians.
You
We
might
could build
picture this ideal scenario that would actually not work in real life with human interactions.
Exactly.
Especially interruptions, which is really big. So let me phrase the billion-dollar question just in case someone's listening to this as their first episode. In every episode of Nurse Rosa's Insights, I ask a billion-dollar question, which is, if you were given a grant for $1 billion to make the changes that you see need to happen in healthcare, how would you like to see that implemented to have the most strategic and sustainable impact?
What I would love to do is be able enough staff to be able to embed within these clinical environments. And maybe it's not all of them at once, but enough to be able to go over 1 or 2 units at a time, understanding their requirements, understanding their challenge points, look at what is working and what is not working, and help them define that. And then from there, I think we would be able to take some of those funds, implement some of the technology changes that were in there, and the retraining that will take place. But I think that what I found historically is that when you at elbow's length with doctors and nurses, most of the time you don't have to do a lot of testing and training because you're really following the natural flow of it, and going through and watching how they interact with patients throughout a day, and asking the questions, well, what would you do to change this? What challenges do you see in this workflow? And it's not only that, but again, I've got a bunch of friends that are physicians as well that I'm up till 9 o'clock. I go home, have dinner with my family, then I go right to my laptop at home and start finishing the work that I couldn't finish when I was there. That's where I would target, because technology is part of the solution, especially now in this day and age. But we can't just haphazardly throw technology at a problem and think it's going to solve it. So It's really that integration of driving IT to be more involved in the daily lives of these clinicians, so you have a better understanding of how technology is actually probably in some cases negatively impacting the way they're working.
Exactly. It could be the best intention. It could be, like I said, a great ideal scenario. But yeah, I think investing the time of that human contact and visualizing the need versus you may also only be aware of the ideal scenarios that are previously expected to be happening at the bedside, and then in the hospitals or even in the clinics. And then you go in with your researchers and you discover, oh, that's not even how they're doing it to start with, because they have to do these other workarounds in order to even make their day happen.
And I think, partially even when I was still in on the provider side, we had clinical analysts that were, clinicians that had moved into more of that application delivery field, so they kind of understood workflow so they could build it out. But even in that scenario, they were still too far removed. I think even if we interacted with them more as the engineering side, it would make a big difference. So I think, really being able to get into, the real day of a nurse and watch them through. And that's the thing, is that we may think that we know nursing from inpatient side, but you move to a cardiology side or a step-up unit. They're all different.
Exactly.
They all have different requirements. So being able to help them slim down that, that tech time, and focus more time on the things that are really important to them, which is patient care. That's been a driver for me forever.
Do you have like a success story that you go back to, if you're working on something and you get frustrated and you're like, I don't feel like I'm making any progress? Do you have something you look back on and you're like, well, at least I did that one good thing and that's making a difference?
Well, I think there are so many of them.
Well, that's good.
It's because, I was on early on when they were really EHRs were starting to really take a hold in healthcare. So we had an inpatient solution, but as we were starting to recruit physician practices to make it a health system, there were a lot of organizations that we were talking that were still on paper process. And part of the reason why they wanted to be part of the health system was it's a lot of money, a lot of staff, it's a lot of resources that I don't think the physician practices really wanted to manage.
Right.
So even some of those great wins where they had the ability to share patient information between physicians in real time, and they were like
the Care Everywhere in Epic and things like that.
So being able to just interact, being able to ask for referral from your primary care physician, being able to share documentation and patient records in real time with the cardiologist, things like that were huge. And I saw how much benefit it was to their workflows, because now it's a paper process and they might get a call.
Set us free from the fax machine,
yes.
please.
Well, I think they'll be around for a little bit longer, but unfortunately, and again, that's a process that continues to have, and that's the challenge with healthcare, is that oftentimes, and I know that you could take, for instance, just FDA regulated devices and the solutions that are tied to those. And it not only does it take a long time for it to get certified, but once it is certified, you're locked into that technology stack for whatever the CFO wants runtime on that. So it could be 10 or 15 years. When I left my health system, when I first jumped into the tech vendor side, which was going back maybe 12, 13 years ago, we still had a NT4 box, which was out of service and out of support, out of security updates for several years, because it was tied to a specific neonatal solution that essentially had a deprecation date for 5 years past. And so now as a organization, you need to take those things into consideration as you start engaging with vendors, because what platform are they tied to? Will I be able to support it 10 years from now? Will it fall off the supported programs, whether it's with one of the big tech vendors or even the software vendors? So those are a lot of pieces that start changing the way you look at those relationships you have with those types of medical devices. Let's be personal.
That's very helpful to take into consideration. So I love these conversations. I always learn so much. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time at VIVE to speak to us today, Christian. And I really appreciate you joining me. So if you've enjoyed this episode of the Nurse Rosa's Insights podcast, please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening. And I would love it if you would leave in the comments if you've learned something, or if there's another $1 billion idea you know of that needs to get some airtime on this podcast, so we can put it out into the universe and make the world a better place. And I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.